Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Bashani Veersinghe. I am an attorney in San Diego. I practice estate planning and business law. My information will be down in the box below. Today we are going to be talking about community property, but before we dive in, my usual disclaimers need to be stated. First, everything on this channel is intended for informational purposes only, should not be construed as legal advice. And before you take any action uh, in your life, make sure that you are speaking with an attorney, because depending on the nature of what your question is or what's going on in your situation, there are factors that always play in and the advice can change. So you want to make sure that you are speaking to a qualified attorney in your area. Also, keep in mind that most of the videos that I do on this channel are related to California law. I am only licensed to practice law in California. So when it comes to estate planning, that's state specific. When it comes to business law, state specific. So just make sure that you are talking to somebody in your state. So with all of that said, let's dive in. So community property is likely a term that you have heard many times. And likely know a little bit about it just based on watching movies or TV shows. But I wanted to make sure that I have a video on this channel that kind of dives into what you need to know about community property. To begin with, California is a community property state. There are 9 such states in the United States. California is one of them. Today, I'm going to be talking about California. Even though there are 8 other states that are community property states, does not mean that if you're living in a community property state that the law is going to be the same, because again, it's state specific. So keep that in mind. So to start off with, in California, when we're talking about community property, it's in relation to married couples. So if you're a single person, growing up, you become an adult at 18, assuming you are not married, all of the things, all of your property, all of your debt, all of your income, all of that is considered separate property. It is your individual property, right? So you go to a job, you earn income, that is your property. You use that income to purchase something, whether it's a personal item or real property, that also belongs to you. The debt that you incur as a result of it, whether you're paying with credit cards or you're getting credit card debt or you're taking out a mortgage loan, that also belongs to you. That's your separate property. When you get married, a community is formed. So basically when you say I do, that's when the community forms, right? When your marriage is legally recognized in your state. So in California, you sign the marriage certificate, your community is formed. Everything you brought into the marriage is considered separate property. However, everything from the moment of your marriage forward likely will be considered community property. The vast majority will be considered community property. So what that means is the job that you had, let's say you are a nurse, and prior to saying I do, all the income that you earned as a nurse belonged to you. After you say I do and your community is formed, every penny you earn is considered community. So half of your income is yours, half of your income technically belongs to your spouse. Same goes for them, right? So your spouse, every penny they earn, half of that is yours. That's what community property is. Community property really becomes a issue, whether something is community or something is separate, becomes an issue only in two occasions. One, you're going through a divorce and you're trying to figure out what what does a community, what counts as community property, what counts as separate property, or somebody dies and now you're trying to figure out who's going to inherit that property. Um, is it separate? Is it community? And there's laws that apply to all of that. So that is a very brief overview of what community property is and in what context we care about it. Now, there's a lot that's left out of this scenario. For example, when we are talking about community property, uh, it's not just assets, it's not just um, the homes you buy or the property that you're purchasing that's considered community. It's also the debt, right? So, uh, debt that you're incurring after your marriage is formed uh, could be considered community, which means each of you own half of that debt. So if when it comes to divorce or death, you might be left holding the bag for your portion and possibly the entire amount. So so keep that in mind. Community property, um, it is something that you had to think about. It's something that you have to be concerned about. So there are things around it. You don't want this automatic label to come into play when you're getting married. You want to keep your things yours. You're including not just your assets but your debts. A simple solution would be to create a prenup, or it might be referred to as a prenup, post pre-marital agreement, um, prenuptial agreement. However you're referring to it, it all means the same thing. Basically, you are creating an agreement with your significant other prior to your marriage to say that after your marriage, you will continue to hold separate property. Your income will continue to be separate property. Your debts will continue to be separate property. That by your marriage alone, you're not going to create community property. With a prenup, and I'll do a separate video on prenups going into more detail about it. But with prenups, you have a lot of flexibility as to what you want to keep separate, what you want to keep together. So you're making conscious decisions as opposed to California legislature making those decisions for you. So that's, in a nutshell, is what community property is. There's a lot to it. There's a family law code, there's the probate law code. All of that dictates what happens with community property. Community property is defined under family law code, but probate code also makes references to it. And we have talked about this in previous videos, and I direct you to that. But if you die without a will or a trust, then how you hold property, whether it's separate property or community property, makes a difference as to who gets that property. So for example, if you were to die intestate, which means that you died without a will or a trust, your community property goes to your spouse. And your separate property, a part of it will go to your spouse, part of it will go to your kids. And if you were to die without kids, then it goes to the spouse. If you were to die without spouse or kids, it goes to your parents, and so on and so forth. So I refer you to that video if you want to learn more about what intestacy law is like. But in the meantime, just keep that in mind. How you're holding property, separate or community, matters. And if you are living in California, this is going to impact you. So if you're thinking about marriage, um, think about a prenup, and I'll do a subsequent video on prenups and what to think about there. And if you are already married and you're living in California and you're holding property and you're not sure if it's separate or community, you may want to speak with an attorney. Also, I said almost all the property that's acquired during your marriage becomes community. However, keep in mind, inheritance generally is not community property, it's considered separate. If it's something that you brought into the marriage, it's considered separate. If you commingle those separate property, potentially the community will have a claim on it. So if you're thinking, well, nothing changed, it's the same job I had prior to marriage and I have the same job after marriage, just keep in mind, income that's being earned is community. Your time is community after marriage. So if you are spending time building a business, potentially the community has a stake on that business. Even if you're using your separate funds to build that business, your spouse can potentially have a claim saying that the time you spent on creating your business, that was community, and therefore the community has a stake in how much that property is worth. So in a scenario of a divorce, that comes into play. So these are all things that you want to keep in mind. And as always, this video is intended for informational purposes only. It is not legal advice. If you do have questions about these matters, please feel free to reach out to me or to an attorney of your choice and talk to them. And again, I practice in California. I can only give legal advice as to California law. So keep that in mind. Reach out to an attorney in your state if that's the case. And please like and subscribe. And also put a comment in. I do read all the comments and will take those into consideration. You have a question you want me to address in a future video, put it in a comment. And keep in mind that the comments are public, so please don't put personal information on a comment that you are making public. Thank you again for joining. I hope you learned something from this video. I look forward to seeing you in my next video.